As you are aware, on Thursday, 23rd March 2023, the Senate passed a motion on the fifth report of the Procedure and Rules Committee and approved amendments to the standing orders, whose effect was to provide a framework for the processing of questions. The approval of the fifth report of the Procedure and Rules Committee on amendments of the Senate standing orders paves the way for Cabinet Secretaries to appear before the Senate to respond to questions. In approving the amendments to the standing orders, the Senate also resolved that the amendments shall take effect from Tuesday, 11th April 2003, and further vary the hours of meetings to provide for sittings on Wednesday morning. In this regard, I wish to guide the Senate on the procedure in which questions shall be considered. Honorable Senators, as it is standard practice, a senator who wishes to ask a question will be required to deliver a signed copy of the question to the clerk. The clerk shall process the question in line with Standing Order 51B and submit the notification to my office for approval. Upon approval, the clerk will be required to convey the questions to the relevant Cabinet Secretaries. The clerk will also submit a list of questions to be asked to the Senate Business Committee. We shall schedule a date and time for appearance of the relevant Cabinet Secretary before the Senate to respond to the question. Let me read that again. The clerk will also submit a list of questions to be asked to the Senate Business Committee. We shall schedule a date and time for appearance of the relevant Cabinet Secretary before the Senate to respond to the question. The clerk will be required to give a Cabinet Secretary at least 7 days' notice before the date appointed for the Cabinet Secretary to appear before the Senate. Upon approval of the schedule by the Senate Business Committee, the clerk will be required to publish on the parliamentary website and circulate to the senators a schedule of all questions not later than Friday preceding the day upon which the question is to be responded to by the relevant Cabinet Secretary. A Cabinet Secretary will in turn be required to provide a physical and electronic copy of a response to a question at least 24 hours before appearing before the Senate. Honorable Senators, questions shall be dispensed with in the manner approved by the Senate Business Committee and as scheduled in the order paper. A senator shall only ask his or her question on the day it is scheduled in the order paper, and senators will be required to address questions to Cabinet Secretaries pursuant to Standing Order 51C1 in the manner approved by the Speaker. It shall be out of order to introduce a new question on the floor of the Senate. Similarly, questions that are not listed in the order paper and therefore not approved by the Speaker and accordingly not scheduled by the Senate Business Committee will not be permitted on the floor of the Senate, and their introduction will be out of order. Pursuant to Standing Order 51C2, a senator may in writing nominate another senator to ask a question on his or her behalf where the senator shall be absent on the day on which the question is listed. However, a question will be dropped in the event of the absence of a senator without written notice to the Speaker. The Speaker may allow withdrawal of a question by a senator for reasons stated. After a Cabinet Secretary has responded to a question, the standing orders give the Speaker power to allow the senator who asked the question to raise a maximum of 2 supplementary questions that relate to the original question. Any other senator shall be allowed to ask 1 supplementary question. Honorable Senators, concerning access to the chamber by Cabinet Secretaries and appreciating the limited seating capacity of the chamber, I have designated the place adjacent to the chair on the right as the appropriate place where Cabinet Secretaries will make their responses to questions. This is the usual place where administration of oath ordinarily takes place. The Cabinet Secretary may be accompanied by a maximum of 3 officers from the ministry who will take seats to the right of the chair reserved for public officers. The question framework obviously demands that the management of time of the Senate is done prudently. In this respect, I direct that each question scheduled shall not take more than 20 minutes. This should account for the original question and the supplementary questions. Cabinet secretaries will be required to be sanctioned in making their responses to questions, but may submit to the clerk documents in support of oral responses, which will be deemed to have been tabled upon receipt by the clerk. Pursuant to Standing Order 51C6C, Cabinet secretaries may make statements or provide reports to the Senate on other matters pertaining to the respective dockets with the leave of the Speaker. In this respect, and appreciating the limitation of time, a Cabinet Secretary may address the Senate on only one matter for not more than 20 minutes. Whenever a Cabinet Secretary addresses the Senate, the Cabinet Secretary shall be heard in silence. Interventions and points of order will not be entertained when the Cabinet Secretary is making his or her submission. Senators may react to the submission by Cabinet Secretaries through supplementary questions. I therefore implore upon honorable senators to acquaint themselves with the Standing Order 98. Unnecessary interruption of a Cabinet Secretary in the course of his or her submission to the Senate will not be entertained. Honorable senators, in light of the new standing orders, there have been concerns as to the power of committees to cause the attendance of Cabinet Secretaries to answer matters for which a Cabinet Secretary is responsible. Concern has been expressed that the new standing orders have taken away the requirement for Cabinet Secretaries to appear before select committees. The standing orders as a whole are facilitative and procedural in their nature, and they are not the basis for which a substantive right, privilege, or requirement is conferred or otherwise taken away. These are the domain of the Constitution and statute law, and not the standing orders. It must be made clear that the amendments to the standing orders to provide for Cabinet Secretaries to respond to questions in the House does not override or overturn the requirements of Article 153(3) and 4B of the Constitution. Cabinet Secretaries will still have the obligation to adhere to this article when required by committees of the Senate. Further, Article 125 of the Constitution has similarly not been overturned by the new standing orders. In any event, honorable senators, no statute, regulation, or subsidiary regulation for that matter can override the Constitution. The Constitution is the supreme law of the land, and any other law that is in contradiction of the Constitution, then to the extent of that contradiction, that law is null and void. And therefore, we place the Constitution as the supreme and mother law. Therefore, the House or any of its committees may invoke its provisions in the discharge of the mandate of the Senate. Honorable senators, given that this is a new process, I appeal for utmost cooperation from senators. I urge senators to familiarize themselves with the new procedure ahead of its application upon resumption of sittings after the short recess pursuant to the calendar. It is my sincere hope that the question tool, aside from statements, petitions, and motion and bills, will enhance our oversight mandate and the executive accountability to Parliament, by extension to the people of this Republic. The House is guided accordingly. I thank you, honorable speakers.